I still remember the exact sound my phone made that morning. One sharp buzz, then another, then another. At first, I thought it was just the usual flood of notifications, but when I glanced down, I froze. Congratulations on the award. You deserve this more than anyone. Finally, the recognition you earned. Dozens of messages, piling in. I set my coffee cup down on the glass desk, the steam curling into the air like a secret. The golden plaque sat right beside me, fresh from last night's ceremony, catching the sunlight that spilled through my office window. My office. My name engraved in bold. I traced the letters with my fingertip, my silk blouse whispering against the chair as I leaned back. You'd think I'd be smiling, but my chest carried a heaviness I couldn't quite shake. Because the louder the applause gets now, the clearer I remember the silence back then. The meetings where my voice went unheard. The nights I poured my soul into pages, only for them to be brushed aside, dismissed as not good enough, or worse, completely ignored. And just as I was trying to savor this moment, the past found me again. A name flashed across my phone screen. One I hadn't seen in years. One that carried with it every memory of doubt, dismissal, and rejection. I let it buzz against the table. For a moment, I just stared at it and whispered to myself. They ignored my work. Now it's award-winning. Back then, I was just a girl with too many notebooks and too many dreams. I lived in a cramped apartment where the paint peeled from the walls, and the only steady sound was the hum of my old desk lamp. That desk was my sanctuary, my battlefield. I'd stay up past midnight, scribbling until my hand cramped, shaping ideas no one seemed to care about. My friends would go out on Friday nights, but me? I stayed home, writing, revising, chasing something I couldn't explain. I still remember the first time I shared my work. I gathered the courage to present it in a small workshop downtown, a room filled with people older, sharper, more polished than me. I wore my best dress, the one with the slightly frayed hem, hoping it would help me look like I belonged. When it was my turn, my voice trembled as I read. My palms were slick, my heart pounded against my ribs. I expected curiosity, maybe even kindness. Instead, there was silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had turned against me. Finally, someone chuckled. "It's cute," they said, as though I were a child showing off crayon drawings instead of years of work. Another participant didn't even bother to look up from their phone. And the organizer, the one I'd admired, just nodded and moved on to the next person without a word. That moment branded me. I left early, my throat burning with unshed tears. On the walk home, I clenched my bag, so tight the straps dug into my palms. When I got back, I collapsed on the floor beside my desk, my manuscript scattered around me like fallen leaves. I wanted to quit. God, I wanted to quit. But then I noticed something. On the corner of my desk sat a worn leather notebook, my grandmother's. She had given it to me when I was 16, telling me, "They may not hear you now, but one day, your words will echo." That night, I opened her notebook and ran my hand over the faded ink of her handwriting. And instead of tearing up my drafts like I wanted to, I started again. I whispered a promise into that empty room, my voice shaking but certain. One day, they'll regret ignoring me. And with that, I chose not to quit. Starting over wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some Hollywood montage with cheerful music in the background. It was survival. By day, I worked whatever jobs I could find, answering phones, filing papers, waiting tables on weekends. By night, I sat hunched over that same old desk, my grandmother's notebook open beside me, reminding me why I couldn't give up. There were nights I cried into my coffee, nights I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop until my vision blurred, nights when I wondered if the world would ever care about what I had to say. But then someone did. It was a woman named Caroline. She was an editor I'd met by chance when I nervously submitted a short piece to an online journal. Unlike the others, she didn't dismiss me. She emailed me back with notes, real notes. Detailed, thoughtful, encouraging. "This has potential," she wrote. "Don't stop." Those 2 words carried me through months of exhaustion. Don't stop. Caroline became my invisible mentor. She pushed me, challenged me, taught me how to refine my voice without ever silencing it. And slowly, painfully, my work began to change. I began to change. My first small win came when one of my essays got published in a local magazine. It wasn't front-page news. It wasn't glamorous. But when I held that issue in my hands and saw my name in print, I cried. Not out of sadness this time, but relief. Proof. After that, doors opened one by one. A client asked me to ghostwrite. Then another. Then a bigger magazine requested a feature. My savings grew. My confidence grew. And the silence that once smothered me started to fade. Still, I kept it all quiet. To the people who once ignored me, I was still the same girl trying to make it, still hustling, still invisible. When they asked, I shrugged and said, "Oh, I'm keeping busy." I never mentioned deadlines stacked on my calendar, or the nights I celebrated quietly with champagne alone after a successful pitch. I learned something in that silence. It was powerful. Silence was no longer the weight of rejection. It was the shield of privacy, the cocoon where my success could grow undisturbed. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were months when bills piled up faster than checks, when self-doubt hit harder than ever. I'd stare in the mirror, dark circles under my eyes, wondering if I was fooling myself. But then I'd remember Caroline's words, "Don't stop." And I didn't. Years of persistence turned into a portfolio, then into a reputation, then into opportunities bigger than I had ever dared to imagine. The girl they once ignored was becoming someone else entirely. I wasn't ready to show them yet. Not until I had proof so undeniable they couldn't laugh it off, couldn't ignore me anymore. I waited. I worked. I sharpened my voice until it could cut through steel. And then one day, that proof arrived. An award. My name engraved in gold. The very work they once dismissed had just won one of the highest honors in my field. And I kept it to myself, waiting for the moment they'd finally see. It didn't take long for the news to travel. Awards have a way of making people suddenly remember your name. The article was everywhere, online headlines, social media, even in the morning paper. My inbox overflowed with congratulations from people I barely knew, and buried among them were names I hadn't seen in years. Names that once dismissed me, ignored me, or worse, pretended I didn't exist. One in particular stood out, Mark. My former boss. The man who once told me, "You've got passion, but not the kind of talent that makes it out there." He wanted to meet. I almost ignored the request, but something inside me whispered that this was the moment I had been waiting for. So I agreed. We met in my office. Not the tiny apartment corner where I used to drown in rejection, but my real office now. A space carved out of years of grit and silence. The walls were lined with shelves of books, some mine, some from the writers who had shaped me. A framed print of my grandmother's handwriting hung above my desk. "One day, your words will echo." And on the polished wood table in the center of the room, the award gleamed under the soft light. When Mark walked in, I watched his eyes dart around the room. He tried to mask his surprise, but I caught the flicker of disbelief. His handshake lingered just a little too long, his smile just a little too tight. "This is quite the place you've got," he said, scanning the artwork on the wall, the city view from my window, the gold plaque on display. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected. "Thank you. It's been years in the making." He cleared his throat. "I read the article. Congratulations. You've really come a long way." There it was, the understatement of the decade. I tilted my head, studying him. "Funny, isn't it? The work that won this award, it's the same kind of work you once told me wasn't worth pursuing." The words landed like a stone in still water. His smile faltered. "I don't remember saying that," he muttered. "Oh, I do," I replied softly, because I went home that night and almost threw it all away. But instead, I chose to keep going. Silence stretched between us. He shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable. I let him sit with it. I wanted him to feel the weight of every ignored email, every dismissive glance, every meeting where my words were brushed aside. Finally, he spoke. "I misjudged you. Clearly." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "No, you didn't misjudge me. You just didn't see me. You didn't care enough to look past your own expectations. And now, the very work you ignored is the reason we're sitting here." His eyes fell to the award on the table. He exhaled, slow, heavy. For once, he had no clever words. And it wasn't just Mark. In the weeks that followed, others reached out too. Family members who once told me to get a real job, colleagues who whispered behind my back, even so-called friends who laughed at my dreams. They all wanted a piece of me now. But when they walked into my space, my home, my office, my world, they couldn't hide their shock. They took in the shelves of published work, the awards, the letters of praise from leaders in my field. They stared at the walls like they were looking at proof that I wasn't the failure they thought I'd be. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to beg them to see me. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. And for the first time, they listened. It was strange, the way they looked at me now. Eyes that once slid right past me were suddenly locked on every word, every gesture, like I was someone entirely new. But I wasn't new. I was just finally seen. When Mark asked if I'd consider consulting for his firm, I almost laughed. Years ago, he wouldn't even take my ideas seriously in meetings. Now he wanted my expertise, my name, to lend credibility to his crumbling company. I didn't laugh, though. I simply folded my hands on the desk and said, "If I ever agree, it won't be on your terms. It'll be on mine. And first, you'll acknowledge what you failed to see in me back then." His jaw tightened. Pride wrestled with shame across his face. But eventually he nodded. "You're right. I owe you that much." It wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the balance of power. With family, it was harder. My cousin, the one who always joked about me playing writer while she climbed the corporate ladder, suddenly wanted advice for her own career. My aunt, who told me I was wasting my life, now boasted to her friends about being related to me. For them, I set different conditions, not about business, but about respect. "If you want to be in my life now," I told them gently but firmly, "it has to be without the belittling, without the dismissals. I don't need apologies, I need change." Some of them blinked, confused, as though they'd never heard me speak with such authority. Others grew defensive. But I didn't waver. "You don't get to rewrite the past," I continued. "But you do get to decide how you show up in my future." Caroline's words echoed in my head. "Don't stop." And I realized I wasn't just talking to them. I was talking to myself. I would never again stop demanding the respect I had earned. Not everyone could meet those conditions. A few drifted away, unable to face the reflection of who they had been. But those who stayed began to shift. Slowly. And as for Mark, he eventually signed a contract under my terms, my conditions, my rules. I didn't agree out of pity. I agreed because it reminded me of how far I had come. The girl he once ignored now had the power to set the price of her own value. And that price was steep. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, recognition, boundaries. For years, I begged silently to be seen. Now I chose exactly when and how I would allow it. And that choice was the real power. The storm of attention eventually quieted, as storms always do. The headlines faded, the congratulatory calls slowed, and the world moved on to the next story. But I didn't mind, because the real change wasn't in the world. It was in me. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself back in my office. The city glowed outside my window, tall buildings lit up like lanterns against the dark. I poured myself a glass of wine, set it on my desk, and pulled open the drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the worn leather notebook my grandmother had given me. The pages were fragile now, the ink faded. I traced her handwriting, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. "They may not hear you now, but one day, your words will echo." Her faith in me had been the spark that lit a fire no one could extinguish. I closed the notebook gently and looked around my office. The shelves lined with books, the awards, the framed letters from readers who said my work had changed their lives. And I thought about that girl I used to be, the one who walked home with her manuscript clutched in trembling hands, fighting the urge to quit. I wanted to tell her, "You were never invisible. You just needed time to build your own light." And as for those who once ignored me, some had softened, some had left, some were still learning how to treat me with the respect I had earned. That was their journey now, not mine. Mine was to keep writing, to keep echoing, to never again let silence mean defeat. I raised my glass, not in bitterness, but in gratitude for the pain, for the resilience, for the transformation that only comes when you refuse to be erased. And with a smile, I whispered into the quiet. They ignored my work, but now the world celebrates it.